Captain Locke coughed. Sweat ran down his feverish face. He was lying on the floor of the temple, but he wasn't alone. Dozens were here, and more in the streets. The Nuclevi's final curse upon the village. The priests shuffled about with cloths over their mouths, a futile attempt to ward off the plague. They were overwhelmed. The village had been shut down. Only a few were still working, and all travel into the village had been barred. That was until the guards had taken ill. Anyone who could still work was employed in treating the village. All the clerics could do was hope that no one had run from the village and taken the plague elsewhere. The flapping of wings drew the captain's gaze. A brilliant white bird fluttered through the window and landed on the rafters above. It was about the size of a heron. The pure white feathers seemed to glow in the faint light of the temple. It let off a sweet melodious chirp. The priests all stopped their work and pointed at the bird before dropping to their knees in supplication. "Bless us, Caladrius, bless us," they chanted. Welcome back to Mythical Phylogeny Adventures. I'm your guide, Jason. There are many powerful creatures in mythology, and it isn't only raw power which should be admired. Caladrius is known for its healing powers, a role which any party would be terrified to lack. Let's take a look at this magnificent creature. Caladrius originally derives from Roman and Greek mythology, before being adapted into Christianity. It is a pure white bird, but there is a disagreement on its appearance. Some say it is a dove, while others claim it is like a heron. This gives us a bit of a size range, but this can easily be addressed by the difference between an adult and one that has only just left the nest. It said that the emperors of Rome and the European kings kept it within the palace while others roamed the wilds. It feeds on insects and seeds found on the ground, and thus many would call it an unclean animal to eat. This is one which I'd rather keep alive as long as possible. Its appearance is fairly simple, but has a special power is where it becomes fascinating. It can cure diseases. Supposedly, it will absorb the illness from around it before flying off, letting the sun's light burn away the infection. Now, how can we achieve this? I touched on magical healing before, but this time we're looking directly at infections in white blood cells. The most common are called neutrophils. These make up about half of all white blood cells. When they find an infection, they will release a compound to attract more white blood cells and perform phagocytosis. This is a process where white blood cells will engulf the bacteria or virus and destroy it using lysosomes. Next we have eosinophils, which also perform phagocytosis, but mostly used to handle parasitic infections. Basophils are involved in allergic reactions and deliver hairpin, which prevents blood clots and thins the blood, and histamines, which dilates blood vessels and increases blood flow. The largest white blood cells are macrophages. They practice phagocytosis but also aid in a variety of hormone production, management of bone and blood vessels, and importantly here, bring antigens to lymphocytes. These will use the antigens to promote defense against the infection. Dendritic cells also help with this. They are also found in areas like the lungs, nose, skin, and digestive tract, and other areas where it's close to the outside of the body and helps with phagocytosis. B cells are a type of lymphocyte. They produce antibodies which will help mark the bacteria and attract other white blood cells. Antibodies need to be specific for each infectious agent. When an antigen is brought to the B cell, it will split into a plasma cell, which produces the antibodies, and the memory cell, which will remain behind for future infections. Additionally, there is another type of lymphocyte called a T cell. They are produced in the bone marrow before going to the thymus to mature. There are several variations to them, including cytotoxic cells, which destroy infected cells, helper T cells, which aid B cells in antibody protection, and activation of cytotoxic T cells and macrophages. Regulatory T cells suppress B and T cells to make sure the immune response doesn't last too long. They also have memory T cells to prepare for future infections. Natural killer T cells distinguish those that are not regular body cells, then helps to destroy them. Finally, we have the natural killer cells. Yes, this is different than the natural killer T cells. These find disease or infected cells and release an enzyme which breaks down the cell membrane and kills the infected cells. That is a simplified overview of white blood cells. So how does this help our bird? In theory, they'll need to transmit their white blood cells into a human. So how? White blood cells aren't well suited to surviving prolonged periods outside the body. But there was one that spent more time near external environments. The dendritic cells. Modifying a different sort of white blood cell is an option as well. This could be the perfect white blood cell for Caladrius to use to aid others with infection. But how does its white blood cells go over to a human? Well, I think we're looking at how viruses and bacteria spread to figure this out. There are several methods of transmission. We have direct contact, where the contaminated individual comes into contact with the host. Droplet, where the source spreads the infective agent via small droplets and is limited to about 1 meter or 3 feet distance, and only particles of 5 to 10 micrometers. And indirect contact, where the bacteria is transmitted on air particles, is limited to 5 micrometers at the largest. Now, dendritic cells are between 10 and 15 micrometers. This tells us that Caladrius has to use either droplet transmission or direct contact. Few accounts speak of Caladrius touching the infected individual, and many are healed by being in the same room. This means droplet. So, how can we spread out the white blood cells? That is fairly simple. Caladrius is a bird. It flies over and spreads the dendritic cells. Using the beating of its wings, it can improve the spreading of the cells. Dendritic cells aren't designed to survive outside the body, and may take time and luck to reach an opening into an individual. You can either get them into the nose, mouth, or rest on a surface before getting into the host. We'll need to protect the white blood cells while they're outside the body. One way to do that is to surround it in a tough membrane similar to spores and bacteria. Now the problem comes in how it operates in a host body. Again, we need to look at tricks used by viruses and bacteria. Caladrius' white blood cells will need to do a few things. First off, it needs to avoid being attacked by the human's immune system. Could it suppress the host immune system the same way a regulatory T cell does? This wouldn't be a good idea. White blood cells don't practice cell division, but that means if the human's immune system is suppressed, then only the Caladrius cells would be able to fight the infection. Now, this can be prevented by allowing Caladrius' white blood cells to multiply, but that would require a surge of nutrients and time to achieve. It can take up to 8 hours to copy the DNA, while mitosis can take up to 2 hours. That doesn't take into account the time to grow. Overall, it can take up to 1 day per cell division. That will be a long time to create enough white blood cells to combat an infection if there isn't the necessary support system. Of course, with healing magic, that could be bypassed and accelerated cell division. If so, it could change the whole process. There isn't enough evidence to prove this. Thus, I am going to go against the suppression of the human's immune system. So, what the Caladrius' white blood cells will need to do is either mimic the human cells or release a compound which will disrupt phagocytosis a bit. Either can work. Once in the body, it can attack the bacteria and the viruses, but how can it tell what is hostile and what it should leave alone? To it, everything is considered a foreign antigen. But the body does mark what it calls a foreign cell with antibodies, and the Caladrius white blood cells will need to target what is marked. I mentioned dendritic cells aid in bringing antigens to B cells to produce antibodies. This could be something that Caladrius cells do to assist themselves. Now, according to the tales, the disease is taken back into Caladrius, but this is a problem. The white blood cells will not be able to return unless they have a means of transportation. So, two options. One, induce the host to start sneezing and move the cells to be droplet transmission once more, but there will be a very low chance of the white blood cells returning to the bird. Thus, option 2. Those tales are exaggerated. The white blood cells remain in the host and simply die. This whole process could take a few days, unless Caladrius did have access to healing magic. If it does, it could produce enough white blood cells to combat the infection quickly. So, the greatest question here is, why do this? This has to be a heavy investment for Caladrius. What does it gain? Well, I believe we are dealing with proactive medicine. Kill viruses and bacteria before they can reach the bird and threaten its health. Finally, Caladrius is said to be able to tell who is going to die. If it looks at you and then turns its gaze away, then you are supposed going to die. When people die, there is a change in their breathing. You'll hear it called a death rattle. It is a wet, crackling sound. There'll be a soft moan-like sound mixed with snoring or gargling sounds. As a bird, it may be able to pick up on the sounds better than a human, or it may notice the change in a person's skin color more. Either is hard to be certain. I honestly have no clue why you would even want to fight Caladrius. It sounds like a fool's errand, one that will only risk starting a plague. If you choose this option, go for a bow and arrow, a slingshot, or find a net. Melee weapons are going to be a hard hit for a bit. Any armor will protect you from its tiny claws and beak. It doesn't have any real threatening attacks. In battle, Caladrius is basically just a nuisance and not a threat. That is why I'm giving Caladrius a lowly 1 of 10 for difficulty. I'd be amazed if it actually hurts you in a fight. But still, why are you fighting this bird? Caladrius is a lifesaver. If it wanders into an area, you can ensure that the locals' health will improve. Just keeping it alive is perfect. It helps out just being there, so why kill it? Well, there are a few reasons. First off, its bone marrow is said to cure blindness, but there is also tales of its dung achieving that as well. So killing it is questionable. I haven't found anything on whether its feathers will do. I would love to collect some for testing. They may work as healing agents too, probably taken in a powder rather than cooked into solution. Truth be told, I'd not kill it. Keep it alive. If you do so, you'll need to look into maintaining its health. Give it plenty of seeds, fruit, and small insects, but you'll need to watch its weight. You may prepare a large cage to hold it, and prevent it from flying away. Caladrius looked at the room, and the sick within. He let out a chirp and soared around the room. Captain Locke pushed himself up and watched. The white bird landed on a rafter and stared at him. No, not at him, but the old man beside Captain Locke. The tiny eyes locked into the man's ashen face. As he took a raspy breath, he turned away. Captain Locke laid back down and watched. Within an hour, his fever broke, and he felt better. The man that had been lying beside him was not so lucky. Before Captain Locke left the temple for some fresh air, the man had left this world. He watched the sun set as he recuperated his strength. Lounging against a wall, he heard the chirp and song as the white bird took wing again and soared into the sky. He bowed his head in thanks to Caladrius. Caladrius is a powerful creature, even if it lacks any offensive power, but one that would still love to have at your side. Thank you for watching, adventurers. Please return next week where we will be riding with the Kelpie. Until then, I'll see you on the roads.